The heavy padlock on Foster Brews caught the last orange light of dusk. A county notice was stapled to the door. The paper read in bold, "License revoked. Noxious commercial operation. Odor pollution complaint." Sarah Whitfield appeared beside him, her fuchsia blazer catching the fading light, a triumphant sneer on her lips.
"This stinkhole is closed permanently. You will never brew another drop."
William said nothing. His hand slid into his pocket, fingers curling around the worn leather of a badge wallet.
"I made sure of that. My wellness committee protects this community from people like you."
If only she knew what was in my pocket.
Sarah spun on her heel, her smile sharp as broken glass, and strode away. The click of her heels faded down the walkway, each step a taunt in the quiet evening. But in the deepening dusk, William Foster's eyes were not those of a defeated man. They held the cold patience of a man who knows exactly where the bodies are buried. William drove home in silence, the badge wallet a cold weight against his thigh.
22 years in the TTB. Every permit, every audit, every bottle of contraband seized.
A memory surfaced, the Ridgemont Estates clubhouse, a Class C federal beverage permit he himself had approved. He opened his laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard to the TTB database. The permit status glowed red, expired. 3 months past due.
She shut down my brewery on a bogus complaint, and she can't even keep her own permit current.
The next morning, at his TTB office, William pulled the clubhouse file and started a routine quarterly audit. The familiar weight of authority settled back into his shoulders.
A routine audit, paperwork. But sometimes, paperwork can be the deadliest weapon.
The system was already in motion, and Sarah Whitfield had no idea that the man whose dreams she'd crushed was now holding the keys to her own. William pulled the clubhouse financials. His eyes narrowed as he skimmed the import logs. A case of Bordeaux listed as domestic red blend. The paper trail was a lie.
Mislabeled imports. That alone could trigger a full suspension.
He flipped a page. Gift shop champagne sales, 18,000. Not a cent reported to the TTB, and the permit itself. Renewal application had been copied and pasted for 3 years. William began typing. The violations formed a pattern. Negligence, deception, and a pattern of false declarations. Across town, in the HOA boardroom, Sarah Whitfield stood before her committee, holding a clipboard like a scepter.
"That brewery, locked down. Odor pollution is a health hazard, and I put a stop to it. Ridgemont Estates remains a pristine, family-friendly community. I'll make sure nothing like that takes root again."
In his office, William saved the draft audit. The report was already 30 pages, and it was just the beginning. Scanning the declaration forms, William's finger stopped on the signature line. Richard Whitfield, General Manager.
Sarah's husband. The man who signed every lie was her husband.
He remembered Rick from the HOA's charity events, a quiet man in his wife's shadow. Now he'd carry the weight of her arrogance.
You didn't ask for this, Rick, but you chose to sign anyway.
That evening, the Ridgemont Estates clubhouse glittered with string lights. Sarah Whitfield raised a champagne flute.
"To community standards. To protecting what we've built from those who would drag us down."
Rick stood beside her, a forced smile on his face, his suit impeccable, yet somehow ill-fitting. From across the lake, a pickup truck idled in the dark. William watched through binoculars, his TTB badge on the dashboard.
They celebrate tonight. Tomorrow, I sign the final audit report.
Back home, he opened the draft report one last time. He added Rick Whitfield's name to the liable parties and hit save. The next morning, William placed the completed audit file on his supervisor's desk. His supervisor opened the clubhouse calendar. Saturday, 11 a.m., Huntley Olu wedding reception. The supervisor hesitated. A raid on a wedding would be a public spectacle.
Every cork popped is a count of evidence lost. The wedding would destroy the very bottles I need to seize.
William argued quietly that any delay would compromise the entire investigation. The violations were too severe. Reluctantly, his superior authorized a full enforcement raid, Saturday at 1100 hours.
2 days. 2 days until the clubhouse loses more than its permit.
The clock on his wall ticked past 10:45. 48 hours and 15 minutes until impact. He pulled out the clubhouse floor plans, marking the ballroom and the wine cellar. He closed the file, the pages thick with consequences none of the Ridgemont residents could begin to imagine. Saturday morning, the Ridgemont Estates clubhouse had become a garden of white roses and champagne towers. Sarah Whitfield, in a lavender dress, surveyed the dance floor with proprietary satisfaction as the bride and groom swayed. Outside, 4 TTB agents in dark jackets gathered near the service entrance, a clubhouse floor plan flat on a car hood. Across the lake, William Foster lowered his binoculars. The dash clock read 10:58. At exactly 11, the ballroom doors swung open. Not for the bride. 4 agents strode through the floral arch. The lead agent's voice cut through the music. This is a federal seizure under the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. A champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. The bride's gasp was swallowed by the sudden frozen silence.
Who do you think you are? This is a private event. I'll have your badges.
From across the lake, William watched through binoculars, his face unreadable. Her muffled screams carried over the water. Behind Sarah, the wedding planner sobbed into her headset. Every bottle in the building was now federal evidence. The agents moved with efficient precision, cataloging champagne bottles, sealing evidence bags, stacking cases into rolling carts.
You can't do this. This is private property. I'll have your badges. I'll have your careers.
The lead agent thrust the warrant into her hands. Sarah scanned the document, her lips moving over the charges. Expired permits, mislabeled imports, unreported sales. Across the room, an agent approached Rick Whitfield. The tuxedo-clad manager stood frozen as the officer spoke in a low, firm voice.
Please, not here. Not in front of everyone. This is a wedding, for God's sake.
Rick, don't say a word. Call the lawyer. They can't just arrest you.
At the entrance, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived, summoned by a frantic call. They halted at the sight of federal badges and traded a look of utter confusion.
This couldn't be happening. The permits were just paperwork. Nobody ever cared about paperwork.
The last case of contraband was loaded onto a van. The wedding guests stood in stunned silence, and the only sound left was the bride crying into her bouquet. Days later, the TTB's final order landed. The Ridgemont Clubhouse was officially dry for 3 years. Rick Whitfield got a $230,000 personal fine and a 10-year ban from the federal alcohol trade. He sat in his attorney's office, numb, staring at the form she had made him sign. All of it was his signature.
She said it was standard bookkeeping. I was just the general manager. Now I am a federal liability.
The HOA board gathered in emergency session. When Sarah entered, no one met her eyes.
That brewery polluted our air. I was protecting the community. How was I supposed to predict a clerical error?
The chairperson leaned forward and said flatly, "Sarah, the clubhouse is our crown jewel, and you've buried it." They voted to strip her of every committee role. She was mid-protest when the gavel fell. William found the letter that evening. His license had been restored, cleared by a federal review of the odor complaint.
An anonymous tip, they called it. A random compliance check. I know better, and soon, so will she.
A process server handed Sarah Whitfield a thick envelope on her doorstep. The class action lawsuit for lost amenity value.
They blame me for defending our community from that stench?
William returned to his brewery. The county's revocation notice peeled away easily. Underneath, the new TTB permit gleamed, protected operating zone, exempt from HOA architectural review. A brief call confirmed it. His parcel was permanently shielded.
It's time they all knew. Not just what happened, but who made it happen.
The Civic Center was booked for an emergency town hall. Every seat would be filled.
Sarah will be there, trying to spin her failure. I'll be in the back, waiting.
His hand slid into his pocket and touched the worn leather of the badge. Just as he had done the night, his brewery was locked. He parked across the street, watching the last light fade from the Ridgemont Clubhouse, and waited for morning. The community center overflowed. Folding chairs filled the aisles, and latecomers lined the walls. Sarah Whitfield strode in wearing her fuchsia blazer, chin high, ready to blame the bureaucrats. William Foster slipped in last, standing near the back, his hand resting inside his jacket pocket. When the floor opened, William walked down the center aisle. The microphone squealed as he took it. He lifted his TTB badge wallet. The red circle gleamed under the fluorescent lights.
My name is William Foster, and I am a senior agent with the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. The audit that shut down your clubhouse, I filed it.
A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Dozens of faces froze in disbelief.
Sarah Whitfield filed that odor complaint to crush my small brewery. I didn't choose this fight, she did, the moment she weaponized an HOA rule to destroy my livelihood.
Sarah Whitfield's face drained of color. The fuchsia blazer now seemed to mock her as the crowd turned. For a long moment, the room hung in silence. Then a single voice from the back shouted, "It was you, Sarah." The room erupted. Voices collided, anger, disbelief, the sound of a community tearing itself apart.
You are lying! This is a vendetta! He's a vindictive little brewer who couldn't follow the rules.
William reached into his jacket and pulled out the thick file. He held up the pages for all to see.
Expired permit, mislabeled imports, unreported champagne sales, all signed by Richard Whitfield. This isn't vengeance, it's the rule of federal law.
A board member asked the question that hung silently in every mind. What about Rick? Where is he now?
Rick Whitfield is barred from the alcohol trade for a decade, facing a personal fine of $230,000. He took the fall for the signatures his wife demanded.
The realization rippled through the crowd. Their dry clubhouse, the lost weddings, the lawsuits, all traced back to one person. A woman near the center aisle stood up. Her voice shook but did not break. She resigns tonight, or I move to dissolve the HOA. The board chair turned pale. He looked at Sarah, then at the packed room, and forced out the motion. All in favor of removing Sarah Whitfield from all HOA offices. Hands shot up like a tide, a silent avalanche that buried her before the count could even begin. The gavel came down. Sarah Whitfield was no longer anything in Ridgemont Estates. She shoved past the folding chairs, her fuchsia blazer a blur of retreat, her sobs swallowed by the humming fluorescent lights. William remained at the podium. When a man asked about his brewery, he lifted the new permit.
Foster Brews now sits inside a federally protected operating zone. The TTB has exempted my land from all HOA architectural review. I answer only to the law, not to personal vendettas.
A scatter of applause broke out near the back. A few neighbors nodded, but on the other side of the aisle, a man in a polo shirt muttered, "We're still dry for 3 years because of him." William picked up the mic one last time. His voice was quiet, but it carried.
I did not start this. I will not apologize for enforcing the law that protects every honest purveyor in this country. If you have a problem with a dry clubhouse, talk to Sarah Whitfield.
He stepped off the podium, badge in hand, and walked back down the center aisle. The room slowly emptied, leaving behind a scatter of paper cups and the faint smell of defeat. 1 week later, the Foster Brews sign gleamed again, and the smell of fresh hops drifted across the property. A couple who had once filed an odor complaint stood at the bar, accepting a flight of IPA.
This one's got a citrus nose, not exactly a noxious odor.
They laughed, uncomfortably. Outside, the new TTB protected zone sign caught the afternoon light. The Whitfield house sat silent, a for sale sign staked into the lawn. Sarah, in sunglasses and a plain gray sweater, lifted a box into the back of a moving truck. Rick stood at the curb, not helping, just watching the house they'd lost. She didn't look back, not at the clubhouse, not at the neighbors watching from their driveways. Across town, William was planting a new row of Citra hops, the protected zone marker solid behind him.
All that noise, and in the end, it was just paperwork.
Months later, the Ridgemont clubhouse was still dry. A resident petition to overturn the ban had failed. The TTB ruling held firm. But Foster Brews was busier than ever. The monthly homebrew class had a waiting list. A county letter arrived, thanking him for his federal service and formally recording the protected zone. He pinned it to the wall inside the brewery, next to the TTB seal. One evening, He sat on his back porch with a glass of stout, the sunset spilling gold across the rooftops of Ridgemont.
I once thought this subdivision would be the thing that broke me, but out of all the noise, a real community was shakily rebuilding.
Some neighbors still grumbled about the dry clubhouse, but most had accepted the new quiet, and as the light faded, the new protected zone sign glowed in the last sun. He set the empty glass on the rail and watched the stars come out over the land that was finally, indisputably, his. The next spring, the brewery hosted a small festival. The scent of fresh wort and cut grass blended under a clear sky. Neighbors who once cursed the hops now lined up for pale ales.
Funny how the smell they sued over is now the smell that brings them here.
The TTB protected zone sign was now part of the landscape, a rust-free emblem of permanence. One afternoon, William received a letter from the county assessor confirming his parcel's exemption from all HOA covenants.
She thought she could bury me. Instead, she made my land untouchable.
The HOA, now led by a more cautious board, sent a tepid invite for William to join. He declined with a handshake. A regular at the bar once asked if he'd do it all again.
I'd prefer a quiet life, but when someone tries to take your dream, you fight, and you make sure they remember the price.
He tapped a fresh keg of stout, and the tap handle, shaped like a gavel, seemed exactly right. A man in a blazer with an HOA lapel pin arrived at the brewery, carrying a leather binder. He introduced himself as Gerald from the board, and asked for a moment of William's time. Gerald laid out a proposal. If William would host a community event at the clubhouse featuring his non-alcoholic craft sodas, the board would petition the TTB for early permit reinstatement, citing his endorsement.
Using my badge to clean up their mess? That's a level of gall I haven't seen since Sarah.
William set down the glass he'd been polishing and met the man's eyes.
You want my name on your petition, but my name is the reason your clubhouse is dry. You understand that, right?
The board member nodded, his expression tight.
Tell the board I'll consider it when the 3 years are up. Not a day before. They need to feel the drought they created.
The man left without another word, the binder still open on the table.
Let them sit with the quiet. Maybe then they'll remember who built that clubhouse.
A week after Gerald's visit, a certified letter from a Denver law firm arrived at the brewery. It claimed the TTB's designation of his parcel as a protected zone had been obtained through ex parte influence, demanding its immediate reversal.
The HOA must be desperate. They'd rather try to dismantle my shield than live with the consequences of their own negligence.
He forwarded the letter to his supervisor. The reply was blunt. The zone was lawful, but a public fight would drag him into the spotlight again.
I could fight and win, but the proceedings would tear open old wounds, and the residents who just started coming around might turn again.
Gerald returned, this time with a compromise. If William withdrew his objection to an early reinstatement petition, the HOA would drop the legal challenge and publicly admit Sarah's mismanagement.
You want me to endorse the very people who tried to destroy me. That's not a compromise. That's a surrender wrapped in legal paper. If you want my name off your list of problems, then the board votes to publicly censure Sarah Whitfield, and the permit stays suspended the full term.
Gerald stared, then nodded once. The board would be informed. William walked out, past the protected zone sign, and didn't look back.
They can have their clubhouse back when they've learned that a community isn't built on rules. It's built on not weaponizing them.
The HOA board convened for an emergency vote. The motion on the table was a public censure of Sarah Whitfield. The resolution passed unanimously. It declared that her false odor complaint had caused the loss of the alcohol permit and lasting harm to the community. The same afternoon, the law firm's challenge against William's protected zone was withdrawn. The letter stamped, dismissed with prejudice.
They finally admitted what I knew from the start. She did it to destroy me, and they all let her.
The censure was published in the community newsletter, alongside the stark reminder that the clubhouse would remain dry for another 30 months.
It was never about the alcohol. It was about someone thinking rules only apply to the little guys.
The Ridgemont clubhouse stood silent, its empty bar a monument to the cost of weaponizing a neighborhood against itself. William walked past the protected zone sign, his badge a familiar weight in his pocket, and allowed himself a single nod.
She wanted to bury me, Instead, she carved my name into the deed forever.
The story of Foster Brews became a quiet legend in the county, a reminder that sometimes the man in the flannel shirt holds the match. The community center held its final meeting of the year, a single agenda item hung on the projector. License reinstatement petition withdrawn. The board chair announced that after thorough legal review, the HOA would not seek early reinstatement. The 3-year suspension would stand. The empty ballroom still smelled faintly of cork and old roses, a ghost of the wedding that never finished.
They finally understood. This wasn't about my hops. It was about a woman who thought her clipboard was a scepter.
The community newsletter ran Sarah Whitfield's photo above the headline. Censure upheld. Former chair settles class action suit. In a small courthouse across the state, Sarah Whitfield signed a settlement for $150,000 in lost amenity damages. At Foster Brews, the protected zone sign had weathered 2 winters and still stood. A new generation of hops climbed the trellis.
The drought will end. They'll have their wine back, but they'll never forget how they lost it and who paid the price.
A patron raised a glass to him across the bar, and William nodded back, the quiet understanding of a neighborhood that had grown up. The Ridgemont story was done. Its last page a simple notice tacked to the clubhouse door. Dry until further notice. Let it be a lesson. The Ridgemont clubhouse bar gathered dust. A faded notice still hung. Permit suspended. No alcohol service. At Foster Brews, the tap handles gleamed. William pulled a pint for a regular and set it on the worn oak.
Funny thing about paperwork. Ignore it, and it buries you. Respect it, and it sets you free.
The protected zone sign outside had earned a patina of age. No one questioned it anymore. Gerald, the HOA board member, returned one quiet afternoon, this time with no binder, just a handshake. He ordered a stout, and the 2 men talked about watering schedules and the new child-safe playground.
You know, Gerald, the only thing I ever wanted was to brew good beer. That and the right to be left alone.
The hop binds on the trellis were thick and heavy. William checked them each evening, the ritual a kind of quiet prayer. The Ridgemont subdivision had learned a hard lesson. A neighborhood is only as strong as its fairness. And somewhere in the archives of the TTB, the name William Foster had a file that closed with a single word, justified. The seasons turned, and the brewery became a fixture. The protected zone sign was now as familiar as the Ridgemont entrance gate.
Some battles are won with muscle, others with patience. This one was won with ink.
The Ridgemont clubhouse remained dry, its members learning to host potlucks with lemonade and iced tea.
Funny, they used to say my hops stank. Now they say the place feels empty without it.
He poured another pint, the foam rising perfectly, and thought of his grandfather's note. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. The protected zone sign had outlasted Sarah Whitfield's entire tenure. Rust-free, unbent, unmoved. One evening, as the sun dipped, William sat on the porch with a glass of stout, the same glass he'd used since his first batch. The subdivision lights flickered on below, a mosaic of ordinary lives. The smell of hops drifted up, no longer a complaint, a landmark. He lifted the glass to the sky, a silent toast to the old man who told him never to quit. And in the end, the smell of hops was just the smell of home. Last call had come and gone. William wiped down the bar, the protected zone sign visible through the window.
I never wanted to be the guy who weaponized his badge, but when they came for my dream, they forgot that justice wears flannel too.
The fermentation tanks hummed their low song, a lullaby for sleeping yeast. William reached into his pocket and felt the worn leather of his TTB badge, the same gesture from the night everything changed. The padlocked door was a memory now. In its place, a welcome mat and a cold pint waited. The hop binds swayed in the breeze, heavy with cones, a testament to seasons of careful labor.
Good night, Foster Brews. You earned your sleep.
Across the lake, the Ridgemont clubhouse was dark, the only sound a wind chime left by a forgotten bride. The protected zone sign stood watch, a silent guardian over a small patch of land that had won its freedom. And in the quiet, a man in a flannel shirt locked up his brewery, his badge a familiar weight, his heart finally at rest.